We have today's lesson, and then next week will be the last lesson of this series. But we will continue to hold class on through into June by doing a little study of the book of Jude. Remember that? Okay. Today, I'm going to start out by completely going back and reviewing something we've already done. How boring is that?
Can we go now then?
No. The scripture lesson is from Matthew 26 and John 21. And we're going to get back on poor old Peter again. Remember, just a few weeks ago we discussed Peter and his denial of Jesus and talked about whether he was a coward or whether he was not a coward. Well, let's review the scripture real quick before we start on the lesson itself. In Matthew chapter 26, starting with verse 69, Peter was sitting out in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him. "You also were with Jesus of Galilee," she said. But he denied it before them all. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. Then he went out to the gateway, where another girl saw him and said to the people there, "This fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth." He denied it again, with an oath. "I don't know the man." Hi, Fred.
Good morning.
We're just talking about you, but I'm not going to tell you what we were saying.
That's okay. I probably didn't need to know.
After a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, "Surely you are one of them, for your accent gives you away." Remember, the Galileans spoke with a very thick accent. Then he began to call down curses upon himself. And he swore to them, "I don't know the man." And right there the rooster crowed. Then Peter remembered the words Jesus had spoken, "Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times." And he went outside and wept bitterly. Then, from John 21, starting with verses 15, this is where Jesus reinstates Peter. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me?" And he answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. I tell you the truth, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." Now, as I said, that first part of the scripture in English should sound pretty familiar since we used the same verses in an earlier lesson. You know, first of all, this whole passage is probably proof that the New Testament tells the honest truth. Think about it. If there was ever an incident that you might expect should be swept under the carpet and hidden, this would be it. But no, it's presented in the full brightness of a spotlight with all of its shame and embarrassment. It's right there. The story was important to tell because it is a perfect example of the way in which Jesus forgives. Even in his hour of greatest need, when Peter fails him, Jesus still forgives. We should also note once again that it's Peter himself who is telling this story, right? Who else was there that would have told the story? Nobody. It had to be Peter himself telling the story of himself. Nobody else was present during the incident that could do so. So Peter is admitting his own cowardice and sin, specifically so that others would know about Jesus' love and forgiveness. Yet, on the other hand, we should not be so quick to point an accusing finger at Peter, because because as we said before, when all the other disciples ran and hid, only Peter did not. In fact, he went directly into the lion's den by going to the courtyard of the high priest. Furthermore, when Peter was first recognized as a follower of Jesus, what would you have done? I took off. Run. He did not. He did not flee in panic. He denied, but he stayed. So too when he was accused a second time. He did not flee to safety. His love for Jesus gave him the courage to stay put. Even the third time, when his speech clearly revealed that he was a Galilean, his intention was to stay. And remember what we said about the cock crow. It was not a rooster crowing.
That's true.
First of all, they didn't even allow chickens and roosters in the city, the city limits. The 3 a.m. in the morning hour was called cock crow. It was at that specific hour that the Roman guard was changed. And the signal for this changing of the guard was a trumpet blast. The Latin word for that trumpet blast is Gallicinium. Translated means cock crow. So it was the sound of this trumpet that Peter suddenly recalled the words of Jesus, that he would deny him 3 times, and Peter weeps bitterly. Now we don't know what happened with Peter next. The Gospels are silent on that. But we should remember that this story is about as much about courage and love as it is about denial. Because it was love that gave Peter the courage to be in that courtyard in the first place. And it was love that enabled him to overcome fear and remain there. And it was surely his love for Jesus that caused him to weep so bitterly when he realized what he had done. Now I've got 3 stories here for you. And at the end of each one, I want you guys to tell me whether they describe failure or not. Okay?
Whether what?
Whether they describe failure or not.
The stories.
Pardon?
The stories describe failure.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to ask you whether you think they do or not.
It's a quiz.
There was a man, well, not exactly. There was a man who was going through a middle-age identity crisis. He was depressed. And with a tone of despair, he lamented, "I've done nothing with my life. I'm a total zero. When I was young, I honestly thought that I would one day be president of the company. I haven't even come close. And I know now that I'll never make it big. It's just painful for me to see what a loser I am." This man actually had a fine record with his life. He had raised a wonderful family. He had been a highly productive person in his company. He had served effectively in the church. He had given strong leadership in the community. But now he is despondent because there is no exotic moment of greatness in his life. He never realized his highest dreams. And that feels like failure. He sees himself as a loser. So what do you think? Is he a loser or a success?
He finally succeeded.
Success.
How did he finally succeed?
He realized. He hit rock bottom and he realized.
Yeah, well, maybe
That
that's the
was-
point.
That was it. And that's the success, because you don't come close to God unless you hit rock bottom. That's the first intro.
Who else would like to make a comment on that?
Well, I think he thinks he failed, but I don't know if God thinks he failed in his
Well,
quest.
when you come down to on a very basic level, people who think they're failures, I mean, that basically is a definition of a failure.
I don't agree. I think that you come into the psychological aspect of this issue, and that's outward appearances and inward appearances. From all outward appearance, he was a great successful and this tribute to his community. And despondency and things like that, that's an illness. It's not know, everybody gets that sometime in their life, they go through something like that, and it's just momentary. Just maybe sorrow, maybe you wanted to be better, but that has no effect on
Well,
reality.
you didn't get to the point where you were as good as you had wanted to be.
Yeah.
Just had another person jump off the bridge this week.
Oh, wow.
73-year-old man. Have no idea why or what or anything else, but he obviously considered his life a failure
Well, I just didn't want to go on.
and didn't want to face whatever he was facing, so he jumped off the bridge. Well, here's the second story. Not long ago, a woman poured out her feelings about the untimely death of her husband. She said, "We planned so carefully for our future, and we wanted such great things from our marriage, and now we have neither. We should have done so much more while we were still together." She said, "I feel like I've just failed you." The truth is, they had the wonderful, vibrant kind of marriage that their friends sought to emulate. They had great children and rich memories, a wonderful home, and yet she said, "I have failed him." Did she?
Same thing, she's just despondent.
You know, failure is what we put in our minds based on what everybody else's expectations are of us. And when we can't meet those expectations, then we're a failure.
Even your own perception.
And in our own perception, you know, if I was supposed to do this and succeed at this, oh my God, I failed. Well, maybe I was supposed to. Maybe I wasn't supposed to go that way. Maybe there was something different that I was supposed to learn from this experience.
Maybe I set the wrong kind of goal for myself.
That's right, the standard.
Maybe the standard I set was higher than I should have set it.
You know, we all set high bars. And
Not all of us. Some people set very low bars.
They don't set any bars.
well, then, yeah.
I think she sounds like she's grieving, in the process of grief, and that she, because you know, that's one thing, every day you should wake up and thank God for that day. And she's all upset now because they didn't get to do a lot of things. Well, then grasp the day, you know, I don't know, but that sounds to me like she's grieving. I don't think she's a failure. I think she's lost her soulmate and she's grieving.
It's the what ifs that bring that out of us. You know, what if? What if I had done this? What if I had done that? That's not necessarily failure.
If you were to take any couple that has been married for a length of time, and one of them died, do you think it's common for the partner to go through this?
Yes,
Of
I get you.
course, you always second guess. There's some things I did that I shouldn't have done, or things that I wish we had done that I didn't do. I didn't tell her enough that I cared about her, or whatever the case is. I think there's always that. Well, here's the third one. Another person recently spoke to James Moore in a similar fashion. He said, "My youth was filled with big dreams. I was going to be a professional athlete, a great one. And look what happened. I ended up a middle-aged nothing." Now, he made a good living for his family. He'd been a devoted husband, an outstanding father, a conscientious citizen, and a big church member. In addition to all that, he gave hours and hours to young people, coaching Little League, helping with school events, working with the church youth program. Over the years, dozens and dozens of young people admired him, learned from him, loved him, and yet he said, "I'm a middle-aged nothing."
Needs to lose weight. Needs to lose a lot of weight.
I think it sounds like a pity party, like someone's supposed to feel sorry for him because he didn't get what he wanted, instead of being grateful for all these lovely things that happened in his life. It sounds like a pity party to me.
I think when you're young, the biggest challenge that somebody has leaving their teen years, going into adulthood, that period right in there, they got to find out who they are and what they want to do in life. And sometimes, and I've seen it in my business career a lot, I work side by side with people who are doing all the things that society says you ought to do. Go get your college degree, get a good job at a good company, or start a business, or whatever it is. Usually it's not start a business, it's to join something that's already there. And they go do this, and they get married, and all the rest of that stuff. And they do it, they live up to the standard that society has placed there for them. But it isn't what they really wanted to do.
Or perhaps the standard that their parents
That's right.
set for
That's
them.
right. And so that discovery process, I think the luckiest people in the world are to find out what they really like and go for it.
And find out early in life.
And, yeah, and get that settled, and most of us don't.
Right.
Most of us don't do that.
Well, isn't all three of those stories, aren't all three of those stories about forgiving, it's about regret, but isn't it all that about forgiving yourself?
Has a
It's
lot
about
to do with it,
forgiveness.
doesn't it?
I mean, you know, that's the
Has a
bottom
lot to
line.
do with it. Well, what can we basically learn from these three stories in common? And it has something to do with Peter. Try this. Only somebody with great dreams can feel great disappointment. And that idea fits Peter to a T. Peter. You remember who Peter was he was the big braggart, the loud mouth. Well, you know, nobody's going to tell me I can't do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. He had great dreams. But then he experienced great disappointment. You know, there's really dramatic power in the story of Peter's denial. I mean, Jesus has been arrested. The situation reeks of danger. Jesus is falsely accused and then brutalized. He's crucified like a common criminal. And in that kind of a hostile environment, Peter is being recognized and accused also. Right? Peter denies it, and he denies it again, then he denies it again, and then the cock crow sounds. You can just begin to imagine how painful this would be for Peter. You know, remembering how he had bragged about his commitment and loyalty, how he had said to Jesus, never, never will I deny you, Lord, never will I do that.
Never say never.
How Jesus had told him, never mind what you say or think, you're going to deny me 3 times, and how Peter protested. I mean, you know, that's a pretty powerful, dramatic scene, really.
But Jesus forgave.
Oh, yes, of course. Peter had been a very simple fellow. He was a fisherman. He was married, had a family, he lived on the edge of poverty. But he had all the qualities of a natural leader. You don't have to be college educated or anything like that to have qualities of being a natural leader. He was single-minded, outspoken. He became the unofficial spokesman for the whole group of disciples, and Jesus changed his name, gave him the name Peter, meaning the rock. Jesus had big dreams for Peter. But in this one dangerous moment, Peter, the rock, cracks. Now, of course, this isn't the end of the story at all. No one learned better than Peter from his own failures. He made a heck of a comeback. When the dreaded details of that first Good Friday had passed, it was Peter who rallied all the other disciples. He became their leader again. He started the church in Jerusalem. He became the first missionary. He refused to quit preaching even when it was dangerous to continue. And it was Peter who was finally crucified upside down because he said that he was not worthy of dying the way Jesus had. So why is this story about Peter so meaningful to us? What rings true to us in this story about Peter?
He's human.
I got some more specific descriptions. Peter had weaknesses.
Yeah.
So do we. Peter slipped and fell. So do we. Peter sometimes blurted things out at the wrong time. So do we. Peter denied his Lord. So do we. So, from this story about Peter, we're going to put forth three dangers. Number one, the danger of dreaming too big. Dreaming too big sets you up for disillusionment. Peter had bitten off more than he could chew. Let's face it. Jesus had warned him of the danger of Peter being his usual eager, compulsive self. He wouldn't be put off, and so he ends up wallowing in disillusionment. He wasn't a coward. He really wasn't. I mean, he'd been ready to fight in the Garden of Gethsemane, drew a sword, ready to go at it. But all that he got for that display was a reprimand from Jesus. Peter dreamed big. He had high hopes. He expected great things. And then everything fell to pieces. The disciples ran and hid. The crowds turned against Jesus. Jesus was arrested and killed. And so we see a picture here just briefly of a man called Peter without faith, without hope. The bubble had burst. Things hadn't worked out. Everybody was ready to throw in the sponge. There wasn't any future. Y'all remember the 1960s?
Oh, yes.
Oy all the flower children and you know, all that kind of stuff. Well, during the turbulent 1960s, there were a lot of young activists who went through the same thing Peter did. They got burned out and disillusioned. You know, these young people were something else, but they were naive and idealistic, and they thought that they could change 1,000 years of history during a summer vacation. They thought that they could revise human nature by marching around with placards and flowers. Their enthusiasm was terrific. Their big dreams were great. But then what? Well,
Come in.
well, I mean,
That's
being
a
few minutes
record.
late is one
That's a
thing,
new
but this
record,
is
yeah,
ridiculous.
you're right.
That's a new record.
I wasn't gonna be
She
here.
did. She
She said when
did.
you are here.
Well, it didn't
Peter's
take as long
today.
as I thought it would.
Oh,
good. We're happy you're here.
You bet we
I
are.
apologize for disrupting.
So, all these young people that had been involved in this whole thing, the peace, you know, peace and love and all the stuff that took place in the 60s, most of them ended up giving up and just kind of waited for the end to come. Some turned to defeatism. Some gave in to hedonism or drugs, feeling, you know what, nothing's ever going to change. That the problems are insurmountable, that nothing really matters anyway. So, you know what? Look out for number one. Eat, drink, and be merry. It's later than you think. There were a lot of the others of those young people tried to lose themselves in religious escapism. Their attitude was, I can't change anything, so I'll just let God worry about that. I'm going to just go home, sit there, read my Bible, pray, and wait for Jesus to come again. Of course, that kind of represents the final stages of disillusionment. You know, you just give up entirely and wait for the end. That's about as low as you can go. So, this is the risk that you take when dreaming too big. You set yourself up as a victim of disappointment. Now, you know, let's be clear about this. It's better to dream big and not realize the dream than it is to never dream at all.
Yeah.
need to watch out for really completely unrealistic expectations, and I think that's what gets a lot of people in trouble.
Which came from our youth,
Yes.
because the expectations placed on us when we were young by our parents and our grandparents and
You even think
All
you're gonna
fun
live
things.
forever when you're young.
But on the same token, if you're dreaming really big, then you're working to attain those goals, so you are contributing really well to society, even though you may not think so. You're still trying to attain these goals, which is probably way more than a lot of other people, you know,
I would
are
guess,
doing, so you're still doing good.
I would guess most
Just
of
not
the
your own
time,
mind.
the goals that we set, as we strive to get to those goals, we sort of realize we may never quite get there, but we know that we're doing what we can along the way. But then that's a little bit different than somebody that just sets completely unrealistic goals and never has any chance of even coming close, and all they do is get frustrated and upset and angry. And as a matter of fact, start blaming everybody else and everything else for
Because
the
they're
reason they
not-
can't get to their goal.
Because they don't believe in God. So, they're not reaching their goals, they're, whatever.
Well,
You know.
let me give you a second danger. The danger of not dreaming big enough. Not dreaming big enough sets you up for apathy. A situation in which you don't even try in the beginning at all. You simply refuse to get involved in life. And that's probably about as bad as a failure can get. Actually, the opposite of faith and love. It's not living at all. It's what we would call existing. It's a way of just enduring life stoically, whereas if you listen to Jesus, life is meant to be lived fully with joy, joyfulness, hopeful, abundant life. That's what Jesus wants for us and came for. But a lot of people never realize this and just strive to survive, making all of life one big, long drudgery. You ever heard the story about the negative, boring, judgmental guest preacher? Spoke one morning at the Yale University Chapel. Now, he took the word Yale as his text, and he let each letter serve as a point in his sermon. He let the Y stand for youth, and went on and on to talk for 20 minutes in a judgmental, negative way about today's youth. He let the A stand for ambition, and then complained about there being no ambition in the world today, and that took another 20 minutes. Then he said the L stood for loyalty. 20 more negative, boring minutes, and by the time he got to E, he had already talked for 60 minutes, but he still added 20 minutes of negative, boring words on energy. At the conclusion of the service, the choir and the guest speaker recessed down the center aisle. On the last row, he saw a student on his knees praying fervently. Well, the preacher was thrilled that his message had so inspired this young Yale student. So he stopped and he asked the young man, what did I say that moved you to such fervent prayer? And the young man said, I was just thanking God that I go to Yale and not to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He said that would have taken 11 hours and 20 minutes. James Moore says, God forgive us when we make the gospel boring. When we lose the zest and excitement of our faith. Heaven forbid when we in the church don't dream big enough, and when we don't inspire others to dream as well. There is a third danger. First one was, there's a danger in dreaming too big. Second one was, there's a danger in not dreaming big enough. The third one is the danger of not acting on your dreams.
The danger of settling
Of settling.
Yeah.
for what you got.
Complacent.
James Moore says a few years ago he conducted a memorial service for a wonderful woman in the church. She was devoted to the church, faithful, supportive in every way. She was also beautifully devoted to her family and friends. She was the epitome, excuse me. She was the epitome of kindness and gracious thoughtfulness. She died in her sleep after a long and productive life. And 3 days later, we had her funeral in our church. The church was packed with people who loved, respected, and appreciated her. A week to the day after her memorial service, her husband showed up in my office. He was sad. Not just because he had lost the love of his life, but even more because he was burdened with feelings of guilt. Here we go again. She was so special, he said, so beautiful inside and out, I loved her so much. And then he started to cry. I never got around to telling her and showing her how special she was to me and how much I loved her and cherished her, he said. I meant to. I just kept putting it off. There were so many things that I wanted to do for her and say to her, but I didn't do them. And now I'm just heartsick. I was just too busy, too preoccupied, too self-absorbed, and now it's too late. That's what we might better call the danger of procrastination. Never getting around to doing anything that you've been dreaming about doing. And you know what? Jesus knew how dangerous that could be. Because we recall in the Gospel of John the scene in Scripture where the resurrected Jesus appears to Peter and asks him 3 consecutive times, Peter, do you love me? And by the way, it might be worthwhile to assume, why did Jesus ask him that 3 times?
Was a man not paying attention the other time.
Peter had denied him 3 times, and Jesus is putting it to him 3 times. Well, whatever. All 3 times he asked Peter, do you love me? And all 3 times Peter replies that he does. And he says, Lord, you know I do. You don't have to keep asking me that. Yes, I do. You know that. And then Jesus said, then feed my sheep. Jesus is asking Peter if he's going to be a part of the kingdom in the future. And he's asking Peter, are you going to commit yourself to that dream or not? Do you love me? Yes. Well, then go feed my sheep. So I think it's safe to say that Peter had learned about all 3 of these dangers. Peter knew that dreaming too big was dangerous. He knew that not dreaming big enough was dangerous, and he knew how bad it would be if you didn't act on your dreams. He learned that you don't have to let one failure defeat you, because with God's help you can pick yourself up and start all over again. Peter also learned that just because one person can't do everything, it does not mean that one person cannot achieve something. And Peter realized you should never stop dreaming.